For anyone passing through Bonanza, Arkansas, it was just a dot on the map, a place where life was supposed to be simple and shielded from the outside world's darkness. But inside one's sprawling, isolated home, a life of fear had reached its catastrophic end. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. On the morning of December 3rd, the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office received a call that cut through the silence of the rural community. It was a request for a welfare check at the luxurious $800,000 residence where Charity Bialise lived with her twin 6-year-old children. The home, massive by local standards, stood out not just for its size but for its sheer isolation, sitting far down a secluded road near the Oklahoma border. This distance, once a symbol of prestige, now became a haunting feature of the tragedy. The call itself, made around 9:30 a.m., was not placed by a family member but by two workers who were concerned about Charity's sudden inaccessibility. Upon arriving at the property, deputies were initially unable to gain entry, highlighting the fortress-like nature of the residence. It took the assistance of the workers, who had some means of access, to finally allow law enforcement to step inside. The scene that greeted them inside the opulent house in the tiny town of just 575 residents was one that would shake the entire county. There, the deputies found the bodies of Charity Bialise and her two 6-year-old children. All three had died from gunshot wounds. The discovery instantly transformed a routine welfare check into a high-stakes death investigation. The sheer brutality of the act, a mother and her two small children shot to death, overshadowed the home's grandeur. The Sebastian County Sheriff's Office immediately secured the scene, launching what would become a complex, multi-layered inquiry. The small-town resources were instantly strained by the magnitude of the crime. The deputies confirmed that the mother and her children had been living in the house alone, separated from her estranged husband, Dr. Randall Bialise, due to an existing no-contact order. This fact established the immediate context for the investigation. The family unit had been fractured by court order, and a specific person had been legally barred from the residence. This order was a direct consequence of a documented history of domestic violence that had been playing out inside those very walls. Investigators quickly learned that the victims' lives had been stolen mere hours after a deeply significant and stressful event: the final day of the contentious divorce proceedings between Charity and Dr. Bialise. This timing immediately cast a long, dark shadow over the separated husband, regardless of whether he was physically present. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Focusing on the victims' lives, reports later surfaced detailing a moment of grace just before the tragedy. Charity's father shared the devastating detail that the twin 6-year-olds had been baptized just the day before their lives were violently ended. This small, recent act of innocence provided a heart-wrenching contrast to the brutal violence that followed, emphasizing the sudden finality of the tragedy for a family that was seemingly seeking spiritual and legal renewal. The victims were not just anonymous bodies in a report. They were a mother and her young twins, whose lives had been marked by a final moment of sanctity before their passing. The fact that the children were twins added a layer of profound loss, as two inseparable lives were taken simultaneously. The home's location along the Oklahoma border, while geographically remote, placed the investigation within reach of larger law enforcement resources, including the Arkansas State Crime Lab. The bodies were promptly transported there for forensic analysis. The primary goal was to definitively determine the cause of death, the gunshots, and, more importantly, the manner of death, a ruling that would formally classify the event as either a homicide, murder by an outside party, or a murder-suicide, where Charity was the shooter. The initial assessment by deputies on scene could not immediately distinguish between the two possibilities, creating an environment of intense speculation within the community and mounting pressure on law enforcement. The complexity of a shooting incident involving 3 people within a secure dwelling demanded painstaking forensic work. Investigators began their methodical processing of the large residence, searching for any anomalies, signs of a forced entry, defensive wounds on the victims, or the location of the murder weapon. Every fiber, every footprint, and every drop of blood became a crucial piece of the puzzle that needed to be sent to the crime lab. The sheer size of the home meant the evidence collection process would be extensive and slow. The hope was that the crime lab's analysis would provide the hard data needed to move the investigation forward. The community, small as it was, held its breath, waiting for the technical findings to reveal the perpetrator. The story was no longer confined to the remote Bonanza community. It had exploded into regional news. The death of a family in such a violent, mysterious manner, coupled with the involvement of a well-known local doctor, guaranteed intense media scrutiny. The initial reports were careful, stating clearly that Dr. Bialis had not been named a suspect and that no arrests had been made. But the tight timeline between the divorce finalization and the discovery fueled an immediate narrative of suspicion. The focus of the investigation was zeroing in on the victim's recent past and the identity of the person legally mandated to stay away. The public silence from the sheriff's office, beyond the initial confirmation of the gruesome discovery, was designed to protect the integrity of the pending crime lab reports. But the absence of concrete answers only amplified the tragedy. The vast, empty rooms of the Bonanza house held the final truth, a truth the crime lab was now tasked with extracting. The final determination of who fired the shots and why would entirely reshape the legal focus of the case. The bodies were found, the crime scene processed, and the question of homicide versus suicide hung in the air. But to truly understand the volatility that led to this moment, investigators knew they had to delve into the dark, documented history of the marriage, a history that included shocking allegations of strangulation and a bitter fight for custody that was finalized only hours before the tragedy. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The history of the marriage between Charity and Dr. Randall Bialis was far from private. It was a matter of public record, chronicled in multiple legal dockets. The most severe incident occurred in February of the same year as the deaths. This incident led directly to the doctor's initial arrest and charges. The allegations were grave: domestic battering, aggravated assault on a family or household member by choking, and 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor in the 3rd degree. The charging documents explicitly stated that the doctor allegedly choked Charity in front of their children at their home. This was a critical piece of evidence, demonstrating a pattern of escalating physical violence directly witnessed by the victim's young twins. Charity's reaction was immediate and decisive. She filed for divorce in March, shortly after the doctor's arrest. Her attorney cited the domestic violence charges and accused Dr. Bialis of having previous cases of domestic abuse. The divorce complaint was not merely about dissolution of marriage. It was a desperate plea for protection. Charity specifically demanded that Dr. Bialis go to anger management and undergo a mental health evaluation before being allowed contact with the children. Most importantly, she sought full custody of their 2 children, asserting that the volatile environment created by the doctor made him unfit for unsupervised parental rights. The criminal charges against Dr. Bialis led to a plea deal that was finalized on October 6th. He pleaded guilty to the reduced charge of domestic battery in the 3rd degree. While he was not sentenced to prison time, the court levied a fine of $1,500 and, crucially, issued the no-contact order that Charity had been living under. The order restricted the doctor from having any direct contact with Charity and stipulated that contact with the children could only occur with court approval. The significance of this plea was twofold. It established a legal admission of guilt regarding violence against Charity, but the reduction of the charges potentially lessened the perceived severity of the act, which could later influence family court rulings on custody. The volatile nature of the Bialis household was not just an immediate concern. It was a long-standing pattern that extended back years. Public records unearthed a confrontation video posted to Facebook in May 2020. The video, which gained viral attention after the deaths, allegedly showed Charity and Dr. Bialis engaged in a heated dispute with Charity's older son, who was 17 at the time. The confrontation was reportedly sparked by the son's failure to immediately return a text message. The video was part of the public narrative of chaos and control surrounding the couple. Following that 2020 incident, the then 17-year-old son, John Randall Powell, filed an emancipation document. The son, just months shy of his 18th birthday, asked the court for adult rights, citing a specific act of destruction by Charity and Dr. Bialis. They allegedly slashed and ruined the tires of his 2005 Ford F-150 vehicle with a knife or ice pick. The son claimed to have video evidence of the vandalism. His request was approved in June 2020, cementing the public record of the couple's destructive and punitive behavior toward their children. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. All these documented incidents, the choking, the plea deal, the no-contact order, and the previous volatile confrontations, converged on December 2nd, the day of the final hearing in the divorce case. This courtroom battle, which had dragged on for months, was the final stage in Charity's fight to secure the safety of her children. The outcome of the custody fight was everything. Charity was fighting for full custody, but according to reports cited by the doctor's defense, the court reportedly awarded Dr. Bialis joint custody. This decision meant that despite the documented history of domestic violence and a current no-contact order, the doctor would retain significant legal rights over the twins. This legal decision, coming only a single day before the bodies were discovered, provided the strongest circumstantial motive in the entire case, regardless of the shooter's identity. For investigators, the timeline was now starkly clear. Documented violence, a final plea for safety, a court ruling that undermined that plea, and then silence. The timeline was clear. A court-sanctioned continuation of contact despite violence. But the legal maneuvering did not end with the custody ruling. The day after the discovery, as the bodies lay with the medical examiner, Dr. Bialis' legal team made a calculated move that shocked observers, forcing the public to question the meaning of cooperation when a lawyer files a motion to dismiss a case that has just ended in tragedy. On December 4th, the day after Charity and her children were found dead, Dr. Bialis' attorney filed a motion to dismiss the divorce case. The reason was chillingly concise and procedural. The plaintiff has passed away. This swift legal action, while technically necessary to close a family law matter where one party is deceased, struck many observers as jarringly quick. Legal experts noted that a lawyer's duty is to resolve their client's matters, and a divorce suit is rendered moot by the death of one of the parties. However, the speed of the motion fueled speculation about the doctor's mindset and priorities in the direct aftermath of the tragedy. As the case garnered regional attention, Dr. Bialis' legal defense proactively engaged the media. The attorney, Michael Pierce, released a statement clarifying the doctor's position. Mr. Bialis has been cooperative with law enforcement and fully supports the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office investigation. We hope the Sheriff's Office finds the truth about what happened to Miss Charity Bialis and their children. This statement was designed to project an image of full transparency and concern, yet the interpretation of fully cooperative often differs drastically between defense counsel and detectives. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Legal analysts highlighted the distinct definitions of cooperation in a death investigation. For a defense attorney, cooperation might mean providing limited information, such as an alibi or a general statement, while legally protecting their client's rights. However, for homicide detectives, true cooperation often means surrendering evidence without warrant, such as granting consent to search a personal cell phone or giving an unfettered statement. Given Dr. Bialis had an attorney, any further interaction with police would be highly controlled, meaning cooperation was likely limited to the bare minimum required to maintain a helpful appearance while preserving his Fifth Amendment rights. At this stage, the investigation was in a legal limbo, awaiting the findings from the Arkansas State Crime Lab. The Sheriff's Office had not formally named Dr. Bialis as a suspect, sticking to the facts that the cause of death was still pending a definitive ruling on the manner of death, homicide, or suicide. The lack of an immediate public classification meant police had to pursue all possibilities, including the scenario where an unknown outside perpetrator committed the crime. Investigators were focused on securing key evidence that could break the case open. In the immediate term, they could access Charity Bialis' cell phone without a warrant, looking at recent text messages, call logs, and communication history to identify who she was speaking to around the time of the killings. This was a critical step to build a timeline and potentially identify a suspect or uncover Charity's state of mind. At the same time, forensic investigators at the scene were focused on crucial physical evidence. Beyond the entry points, they were mapping the exact location of the firearm relative to Charity's body. If the weapon was found within arm's reach, it would lend credence to a potential murder-suicide scenario. If the weapon was in another room, missing, or showed fingerprints inconsistent with Charity's, the investigation would immediately pivot toward a homicide. They were also executing search warrants to collect trace evidence, like fingerprints and DNA, from all points of entry and within the home, looking for any trace of an unknown presence. The complexity of the case, involving a high-profile figure and a tragic triple death, meant that the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office was likely treating it as an all-hands-on-deck investigation, with a high level of scrutiny from the District Attorney's Office. Even without a formal determination of the manner of death, authorities were undoubtedly keeping tabs on Dr. Bialis. This vigilance is standard procedure for any person of interest in a death investigation, ensuring they can move swiftly to an arrest should the medical examiner's report point towards homicide. The final custody ruling from December 2nd, reportedly awarding Dr. Bialis joint custody, now took on a dark, retrospective significance. This ruling, which Charity had fought bitterly against, could be argued in court as a potential motive for multiple outcomes, either a final act of revenge by a suspect or a trigger for despair in the victim. The fact that the court decision directly contradicted Charity's stated fears about her children's safety made the final 24 hours of her life the central focus of every police theory. The police had the facts of the domestic abuse, the rapid divorce dismissal, and the chilling custody ruling. But without the crime lab's final determination on the manner of death, the case remains stalled in legal limbo. What evidence would the crime lab prioritize? And how long would the small Arkansas department have to wait for the critical ruling that would finally decide whether Dr. Randall Bialis would officially transition from a person of interest to a suspect? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. In a case riddled with circumstantial evidence and a compelling timeline of domestic turmoil, the final, undeniable truth lay not with a lawyer or a detective, but with the painstaking work of the Arkansas State Crime Lab. The forensic analysis was the last barrier to a definitive classification of the tragedy. The bodies of Charity Bialis and her 2 children were subjected to rigorous examination by the medical examiner. Their primary tasks were twofold: confirming the cause of death as gunshot wounds and definitively classifying the manner of death as either homicide or suicide. This crucial classification would determine the entire course of the criminal investigation. In the context of a busy metropolitan area, such results could take months, but due to the high-profile nature and gravity of the case in a smaller jurisdiction, analysts expected the results to be expedited, potentially within weeks, while maintaining proper protocol and chains of custody to ensure evidentiary integrity. Forensic experts working in the field identified several key pieces of evidence that the crime lab would be prioritizing. A crucial test was the analysis of GSR on the hands of the victims, particularly Charity. The presence of residue would indicate she had fired a weapon. The absence would heavily point to a triple homicide scenario. Determining if one weapon was used for all 3 victims, tracing the weapon's ownership, and analyzing ballistics to match the bullets and casings found at the scene. Analyzing the trajectory and closeness of the wounds to determine if they were self-inflicted, contact wounds, or fired from a distance. The ultimate ruling of homicide would immediately focus the investigation squarely on Dr. Randall Bialis. The confluence of factors, the documented domestic violence, the recent custody ruling against Charity's wishes, and the no-contact order, would provide the police and the district attorney's office with significant motive. Legal analysts suggested that a homicide ruling would be enough probable cause to obtain search warrants for the doctor's possessions, including his cell phone records, to track his exact location via cell site data at the time of the killings. Conversely, a ruling of murder-suicide would largely shift the focus away from the doctor, potentially closing the criminal investigation, though public scrutiny would remain intense. The doctor's defense would likely leverage the divorce outcome, the reported granting of joint custody, as a devastating trigger, arguing that Charity was so distraught and felt so unprotected by the system that she felt her only option was to take her own life and the lives of her children. The defense's argument would center on the complainant's severe emotional state following the loss of the custody battle. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The criminal justice system offered certain protective measures that were not as easily available in the family court system. If Dr. Bialis were to be charged, the court could impose conditions of release, such as an ankle monitor or setting a high bond bail, with the threat of revocation for any violation. In contrast, The protective orders issued in family court were harder to enforce with immediate custody, relying instead on the threat of future criminal charges for violations. This disparity highlighted the systemic challenge of protecting victims in high-conflict divorce cases marked by violence. Police were also conducting extensive interviews with neighbors, family members, and the workers who initially called for the welfare check, piecing together a timeline of events and looking for any witnesses who may have seen Dr. Bialis or any unfamiliar vehicle near the secluded Bonanza residence in the hours leading up to the discovery. Every attempt was being made to corroborate or debunk the alibi he provided through his attorney. The attorney's advice to Dr. Bialis regarding further police interviews was critical. Should police call and request an interview, especially in a death investigation, legal counsel would almost certainly advise the doctor to invoke his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and demand the presence of his attorney. Even with the public stance of full cooperation, the legal priority would be to prevent the client from inadvertently offering contradictory or self-incriminating statements. The entire community of Bonanza, Arkansas, was locked in a painful holding pattern, waiting for the scientific facts to displace the speculation. The tragedy had ripped open the veneer of safety in the small town, leaving behind a haunting legal and emotional landscape. The final word, however, rested not in a judge's ruling, but in the laboratory findings, which would irrevocably define the end of Charity Bialis' life and the fate of her estranged husband. The revelation concerned the doctor's previous marriage to Shauna Bialis, who died in 2012 at the age of 34. The report, cited by media outlets, stated that Shauna was also found dead from a gunshot wound, and her death was officially ruled a suicide by police at the time. This detail introduced an unprecedented layer of complexity, raising the possibility that the current investigation was not an isolated incident, but potentially the devastating culmination of a years-long pattern. Shauna's obituary described her as someone who lived a fun-living life and listed Dr. Randy Bialis among those she was survived by. However, similar to the current case, the official ruling did not settle the matter for everyone. Shauna's own family members reportedly harbored deep suspicions that her death was not suicide, but murder, alleging that she had too much to live for and suspecting the doctor's involvement. It is critical to note that despite these claims, Dr. Bialis was never charged, and the 2012 case, to public knowledge, was never designated or reopened as a murder investigation. Yet, the parallel, two wives of the same man, both dying from gunshot wounds, now hung over the current case like a shroud. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The timing of the Bonanza tragedy also brought into sharp focus the desperation of Charity Bialis in her final months, as she tried to secure protection through all available channels. Beyond the court system, Charity had reached out to a state official, confirming her deep-seated fear for her safety and that of her children. Arkansas State Senator Terry Rice confirmed to local news that Charity had contacted him earlier in the year seeking help and protection. This direct appeal to a state lawmaker underscored Charity's belief that the existing legal mechanisms, the no-contact order and the divorce court, were insufficient to shield her from the man she believed posed a lethal threat. This action demonstrated Charity's awareness of the gravity of her situation and her proactive, yet ultimately unsuccessful, attempts to circumvent the escalating risk. Her attempts to seek intervention from a political figure revealed a frantic effort to escape the violence that ultimately consumed her and her children. The day before the bodies were found, the final divorce hearing on December 2nd ended with a custody decision that Charity Bialis had vigorously opposed. The defense attorney for Dr. Bialis offered a specific and controversial detail about the new sharing arrangement. Dr. Bialis was reportedly awarded 2 weeks of custody with the children, while Charity would be allotted 1 week. This specific split, which gave the man who pleaded guilty to domestic violence a significantly larger block of time with the children than the mother who fought for full custody, was perceived by the family as a profound failure of the family court system. According to the defense attorney, claimed that the children and Charity died before Dr. Bialis could exercise his newly awarded schedule, stating that his scheduled pickup of the children was set for Friday the 5th. The timing, therefore, suggested that the deaths occurred just hours after the final legal decision was rendered, and just days before the children were legally mandated to begin spending 2 weeks with their estranged father. This new custody arrangement, if confirmed, heightened the speculation regarding motive in two distinct, devastating scenarios. If the event was a homicide, the ruling could have fueled a perpetrator's rage over the loss of a financial settlement or control, or it could have been a deliberate act to prevent the new custody arrangement from taking effect. Conversely, if ruled a murder-suicide, the judgment, forcing her to relinquish her children for 2-week periods to the man she accused of attempting to strangle her, could be argued as the final catastrophic trigger for Charity Bialas's despair. The timing of the event, occurring between the final court hearing on Tuesday and the potential Friday handover, became the tightest and most critical window of the entire case. The revelation of Shauna Bialas's death in 2012 profoundly altered the investigation's context. The local authorities, initially focused on a single domestic tragedy, were now dealing with a case that spanned over a decade and involved 2 wives who died in the same manner. This development provided an enormous boost to the circumstantial case against Dr. Bialas, even without any charges being filed. It gave investigators a powerful historical pattern to explore, forcing them to look back at the 2012 death to see if any evidence or witnesses were missed, or if the initial suicide ruling could now be challenged given the terrifying similarities to the Bonanza tragedy. The police had already executed several search warrants, 6 served out of 12 being processed, and were following up on countless tips and numerous interviews. The pressure was immense on the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office to not only solve the death of Charity and her children, but to address the horrific possibility that a violent pattern had gone unrecognized for years. The family's public fear and the details of the custody split made the immediate resolution of the case a matter of local, state, and now national significance. The investigation had doubled in scope and depth, incorporating a previous death and a state politician's testimony. But the final, definitive push toward a charging decision required resources beyond the local sheriff's capability. What specific, high-tech evidence were the Secret Service and Homeland Security truly searching for, and how would their highly specialized forensic findings finally break the silence of the Bonanza home? The involvement of federal agencies immediately signified that the investigation's focus was heavily centered on electronic evidence and forensics that require advanced expertise. The Secret Service, known for its Electronic Crimes Task Force, possesses high-end equipment and lab capabilities that far surpass those of most local jurisdictions. The task of their specialized teams was likely the exhaustive extraction and analysis of data from the multiple electronic devices belonging to both Charity and Dr. Bialas, including mobile phones, computers, and tablets. This included attempting to recover deleted data, examining metadata to establish location and activity, digital alibis, and analyzing financial records to substantiate the father's claim of financial motive. The goal was to establish a digital footprint that could either solidify an alibi for Dr. Bialas or, conversely, reveal a pattern of surveillance, threats, or a paper trail leading to the financial trigger of the tragedy. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The Sebastian County Sheriff's Office confirmed they were processing a large volume of legal mandates. 12 search warrants were in process, with 6 already served, indicating a massive, targeted effort to seize and secure evidence from multiple locations and entities. These warrants were not just for the Bonanza home but were surely cast widely, targeting financial institutions, mobile service providers, and potentially the medical offices or residences of Dr. Bialas, based on the probable cause established by the February domestic violence conviction and the extremely tight timeline to the custody ruling. The sheer number of warrants underscored the methodical approach to building an ironclad case independent of the initial, ambiguous crime scene findings. The forensic investigation was simultaneously focused on overcoming the ambiguity of the scene. Homicide experts consulted on the case detailed the critical importance of tests that the crime lab would be prioritizing to rule out a staged suicide. The presence or absence of gunpowder residue on Charity Bialas's hands would be a powerful indicator. The test specifically looks for the barium, antimony, and lead particles expelled when a weapon is fired. If no GSR is present, it dramatically increases the likelihood that she did not fire the fatal shots. Investigators would be examining the victim's skin for stippling, the peppered pattern left by unburned gunpowder embedding in the skin. The presence of stippling would indicate a close contact shot, a factor common in suicides. However, the precise pattern must align with the weapon's barrel length and the documented angle of the shot. In a triple death scenario, The sequence and nature of the wounds on all three bodies, Charity's versus the children's, would be meticulously compared to develop a consistent narrative of events. The location of the murder weapon and whose fingerprints were on it became paramount. If the scene was staged, the presence of non-victim DNA or the absence of the victim's prints on the primary surface of the gun would immediately shift the ruling to homicide. The defense attorneys claimed that Dr. Bialise was fully cooperative and gave a voluntary interview was scrutinized against this aggressive use of search warrants. The distinction is crucial. Dr. Bialise was likely interviewed early in the process when he was a person of interest, not a formal suspect. In reality, cooperation, like providing access to requested items, is a carefully managed strategy by counsel, designed to stave off the perception of guilt while preserving the client's rights. True, unfettered cooperation, like surrendering passwords to encrypted accounts without a warrant, is rare, and the 12 search warrants confirmed that the police were legally forcing access to the evidence they needed, rather than relying solely on the doctor's goodwill. The police must have a rock-solid alibi from the doctor, likely corroborated by cell site location data and automatic license plate reader history, to remove him from the pool of suspects. The involvement of a state senator in Charity's failed plea for help reinforced the system failure. Senator Rice's confirmation of Charity's outreach added a political dimension to the tragedy, suggesting that official documentation of risk existed beyond the family court's record. This elevated the importance of the final ruling, as the prosecutor's office was now under immense pressure not only to deliver justice for the 3 lives lost, but to answer why the system could not protect Charity after she sought help from the highest levels of state government. The investigation's outcome would be the final, irreversible verdict on both the accused and the protective mechanisms that failed Charity Bialise. The investigation, now aided by the pinnacle of federal forensic technology, hinges on a single question. Did the sophisticated digital footprint and the physical evidence within the Bonanza home align with the defense's claim of innocence? Or will the findings of the Secret Service and the crime lab provide the final, undeniable evidence needed to link Dr. Randall Bialise to the violent end of his wife and 2 young children? And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.